Hi, boys and girls. Mr. Ruby here. This week in Foundations, we're actually moving on to a new unit. And with this new unit, we're going to be learning a little bit about closed syllable exceptions. Yeah, those are really cool. So, closed syllable exceptions. But before we get into the closed syllable exceptions, I just want to review again what closed syllables are, what you learned last week. Because I know sometimes they can be a little tricky in remembering how to mark them because it's more than just making one mark on them, like other things. So I just want to review what a closed syllable is, what the rules are, and how we mark them. And then we'll get into the new closed syllable exceptions. All right, so closed syllable. We have 3 rules for closed syllables. Go ahead and show me one finger. Let's review what the first rule is. The first rule is it has to have one vowel. And the way I remember that is because the first rule, number 1, and then I connect it with only one vowel. Okay? So the first rule, it has one vowel. Second rule, that vowel is followed by a consonant. Okay? And the third rule is that vowel makes a short vowel sound. So if it has all 3 of those, then we know it's a closed syllable. And then we need to make sure that we mark them up. Sometimes we may know or identify it as a closed syllable, but then we forget to mark it. So we need to make sure that we remember to mark those words as closed syllables. Let me give you an example. All right, really simple, small, basic word. Let's tap it out together. At, cat. All right, let's look at those 3 rules, see if it follows those 3 rules, and then we may need to mark it. So let's look. First rule, does it have one vowel? Yes. Rule number 2, is it followed by a consonant? Yes. Rule number 3, does the vowel make the short vowel sound? Yes. Ah. It makes that ah sound, so it's a short vowel. So it follows all 3 of those rules, which means it's a closed syllable. Now, remember when we mark closed syllables, we need to scoop it or underline. I prefer scooping because sometimes when I underline blends and digraphs, it can get a little confusing. So I like to scoop, but you can underline the whole word. So scoop the whole word. I put a C on the bottom, and then we put a brev right above that vowel to remind us that it makes that short A sound. Ah. Okay, so that is how we mark closed syllables. Let's do one more word. All right, let's look at this word and tap it out. Rim. All right, let's look at those 3 rules. Rule number 1, does it have one vowel? Yes, it does. Rule number 2, is it followed by a consonant? Yes, it is. Rule number 3, does it make the short I sound? Yes, it does. So because it follows all 3 rules, we know that it is a closed syllable. And now we need to go ahead and make sure that we mark it. So when we mark a closed syllable, we scoop it, put a C in the bottom, and put our brev right on top. Again, that brev reminds us that that vowel is a short vowel, and it makes that short vowel sound. Okay? All right. Now we're going to talk about closed syllable exceptions. Those are the new ones that we're going to learn about, and the new ones that we've added to our basic sound card wall, okay? All right, so a closed syllable exception. The word exception means it doesn't follow the rules. It's like a rule breaker. That's how I remember it. Knowing that an exception is a rule breaker. It's something that doesn't follow the rules. So if it's a closed syllable exception, it does not follow the closed syllable rules, those 3 rules. An exception is something that is unexpected that happens. So for instance, if we see something in a word and we're like, wait a minute, that doesn't look right, or that's not following one of the rules I've been taught, most likely it's because it's an exception. Okay, there are 5 closed syllable exceptions that we're going to learn, and those exceptions are actually glued sounds. Okay, they're sounds, they're all letters glued together that make one sound, and they're on green cards. So if you notice here, I have my new closed syllable exceptions added on here to my wall. And those 5 are glued sounds, but they're just exceptions because they break a rule. Okay, now the reason why these are called exceptions is because the rule that they break is the 3rd rule. They don't make that short vowel sound. They actually make a long vowel sound. And a long vowel sound means the vowel says its name. So for instance, if an A is a long vowel sound in a word, it just makes the A sound. A long I vowel makes the I sound. A long E vowel makes the E sound. A long U vowel makes the U sound. Okay? All right, so I'm going to introduce you to our green new closed syllable exception sound cards, because these will be added on to our drill sounds when we do our drill sounds every day in the beginning. Even when you do them at home, you're going to add these to your boards and practice reading these and practice these sounds every day. Okay? All right, let's look at our first one. We have OLD, cold, old. OLD, cold, old. Repeat. Nice. Now the reason why this is an exception. Did you notice the vowel and what sound it makes? It makes that O sound. Old. It's not saying ald. It's saying old. So it's a long vowel sound. So that is why it's a rule breaker. OLT, colt, olt. OLT, colt, olt. Repeat. Good job. Again, this is making that O sound, olt, not alt. Okay. All right, the next one. OST, post, ost. OST, post, ost. Repeat. Nice work. Again, this is making that long O sound. Ost. He makes his own name. He says his own name. O. This one's my favorite one. ILD, wild, isled. ILD, wild, isled. Go ahead and repeat. Very good. Again, looking at this sound, it makes that long I sound. That I says his name. Isled. Does not say ild. It says isled. Okay. And our last one. IND, find, eind. IND, find, eind. Go ahead and repeat. Nice job. Remember the IND? It makes that long I sound, so he says his name. Eind. Eind. So again, it's a rule breaker. It makes that long sound. All right. Let me show you an example of one of these in a word. All right, so let's look at this word first. Let's go ahead and see what we look at what we see here. We have the OLD. Now, we know that OLD is actually a glued sound. So instead of using all three of these, now, oops, sorry. Yeah. So now we go ahead and we use the green closed syllable exception, OLD. So we replace those three with that green card. Okay, now let's go ahead and tap this out together. Old. Remember, glued sounds, the fingers stay together. Old. Cold. So this word has the closed syllable exception, and let's see why. Let's look at our rules. Rule number 1, does it have one vowel? It does. Rule number 2, is it followed by a consonant? It is. Rule number 3, it makes a short vowel sound. Oh. Nope, it makes that long sound. So therefore, it is not a closed syllable. It's a closed syllable exception. Okay, exception. All right, let me give you another example. All right, here we go. Let's tap it out. Find, find. Let's look at our 3 rules. Rule number 1, does it have one vowel? Yep. Rule number 2, is it followed by a consonant? Yep. Rule number 3, does it have a short vowel? Eind. Nope. It makes that long vowel sound, which means it is not a closed syllable. It does not follow all 3 of those rules, so it's a closed syllable exception. All right. Now, there's something a little bit tricky about these exceptions. Sometimes you might see these letters in a word, but they're actually not glued together. They actually aren't glued syllable exceptions. Okay. Sometimes they are closed syllables, depending on how they're used. Let me give you an example of that. So this word, let's tap it out. Lost. So if I lost something, or I lost my teddy bear, okay? Now, if you notice OST, that is the same thing as OST here. So you're probably wondering, well, Mr. Rubel, why can't I just use the green card? Because if we look at that O in this word, it actually makes the short sound. Lost, not lost. So if it makes that short sound, short vowel sound, then we use the separate sound cards. We won't use the green cards. Okay, let's look at our 3 rules for closed syllables. Rule 1, does it have one vowel? Yep. Rule 2, is it followed by a consonant? Yep. Rule 3, does it make that short vowel sound? Yes, it does. It follows all 3 of those rules, which means it's a closed syllable. Okay, so you see how that can be a little tricky sometimes? So this more helps us when it comes to spelling. We want to spell a word. If we know that it doesn't make that long sound, then I can just use the separate cards. Okay? All right. Now we are going to move on to how we mark closed syllables. Marking closed syllables is somewhat similar to marking closed syllable exceptions. So closed syllable exceptions, when we mark them, they are somewhat similar to the way we mark closed syllables, but there's some little changes that we need to make. All right, let's look at this word. Let's tap it out. Mind. All right, let's look at those 3 rules. Rule number 1, does it have one vowel? Yes, it does. Rule number 2, is it followed by a consonant? Yes, it is. Rule number 3, does it make that short sound, that short vowel sound? I. Nope, it makes that long sound. It says its name. So that means it is not a closed syllable, but it's a closed syllable exception. Okay, it's a rule breaker. So when we mark closed syllable exceptions, we still scoop it like we do a closed. Again, I like to scoop, but if you prefer to underline, you can underline. Scoop it. We put that C on the bottom. But now we have to add something to it. Remember, it's a closed syllable exception. So when we mark it, we actually put an X on the bottom. We cross out that C because we're saying, nope, it's not closed. The way I remember to mark closed syllable exceptions is I remember that the word exception makes that X sound. And that reminds me that I need to put my X on the C. Okay, so remember, exception can remind you to make that X down there on the C. Cross out that C because it's a rule breaker, so it's not a closed syllable. And then normally we would put a brev on top of the vowel to let us know that it makes that short sound. But this vowel makes a long sound, so we're actually going to put what we call a macron. And a macron is just a little line right above the vowel. So I'm going to put a macron, just like that, above my vowel. And that macron reminds me that that I says the I sound. It makes a long vowel sound, mind. And that's how we mark a closed syllable exception. So again, it's kind of similar to a closed syllable marking, but we always put that X, we cross out that C, and we put a macron on top of that vowel. Okay, let me give you another example. All right, let's go ahead and tap this one out. Old, mold. Let's look at our rules. Rule number 1, does it have one vowel? Yes, it does. Rule number 2, is it followed by a consonant? Yes, it is. Rule number 3, does it make the short sound, short vowel sound? O. Note that O makes its own, says its name, right? So it makes a long sound. So it does not follow those 3 rules, which means it's a rule breaker, which means it's a closed syllable exception. So now I need to make sure that I mark it. So when I mark, I'm going to scoop it, put a C, put my X through that C because it is not a closed syllable. And then we put our macron, which is a straight line right above the vowel. All right, let's do one more. All right, here's our next one. Let's go ahead and tap it out. Bolt. Bolt. All right, the word is bolt. Let's look at our rules. Rule number 1, it has one vowel. Yep. Rule number 2, it is followed by a consonant, which it is. Rule number 3, it makes the short vowel sound. Bolt. It makes that long sound. It's saying its name. So that means it's not a closed syllable. It's a closed syllable exception. That's right. So let's go ahead and mark it. So we scoop it, put a C, cross it out, and then we put our macron right above the vowel. Reminds us that that O says its name, bolt. All right, boys and girls. So again, just a reminder, we did learn today closed syllable exception. We learned that an exception is what we call a rule breaker, someone who breaks the rules. And these closed syllable exceptions break that short vowel rule. Okay, instead, it makes a long vowel sound. We also learned how to mark a closed Syllable exception, remember we scoop our word, we put a C on the bottom, we exit out, exception, exit out, and then we put our macron right above the vowel. Okay? Again, there are 5 closed syllable exception include sounds. All right, boys and girls. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you again next time. Bye.